Years ago, I was visiting Gettysburg, the site of 3 days of horrific fighting during the American Civil War. You've all heard Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which talked about the losses suffered on both sides over those long days and how the nation needed to prevail. This speech is part of what made me make this pilgrimage. I wandered around many of the battlefields, taking in the huge scope of the lands around the towns where thousands of men died. At some point, it became overwhelming to think of the brutal battles and the blood that was shed. I got nearer to a house which was described as a hospital at the time, which was the case for many houses that were turned into field hospitals due to the vast numbers of injured men. These houses were left blood-stained from all the terrifying wounds to the soldiers. I took some photos and began to head back to my car when I heard this horrifying howl of some animal in great distress. It resounded throughout the entire area. The sound sent a spike of fear down my spine and filled my soul with dread. I glanced around the fields and I couldn't see anything like a poor dog or wolf or whatever could have been making those horrendous noises. I started to back away from the area where I parked my car, and I looked over the field one last time, and I could swear I saw the vague, ghostly image of a dog standing over what looked like a body. It put its head back and let out a long, painful howl that echoed in my ears, and I could feel it vibrate my entire body. At this point, pure fear filled my mind, and all I could do was turn and run. I got to my car and scrambled with my keys and sped out of there as fast as I could. Now, I have an okay knowledge of the Civil War, but I'd never heard the story of Brigadier General Barksdale. Apparently, he'd been mortally wounded in the charge on Seminary Ridge. The last report on the general was he was seen laying on the ground in front of a house with a young boy giving him water by the spoonful. He would pass away and was buried in a field close by. His wife would come to retrieve the body, and his faithful dog would not leave the gravesite. It laid there for days and eventually died because it refused to take food or water or go with anybody who tried to lure it away. It is truly a sad story of a faithful dog who is tied to its owner for eternity. All I know is to this day I can still hear the unearthly howl of that dog, and it echoes in my ears whenever I think about Gettysburg. Back when I was in college and was off during the summer, I was driving through Pennsylvania and ended up on a battlefield in Gettysburg. It was kind of a lark because I wasn't much of a history buff, but some part of me said I couldn't just drive past the area without stopping to take some photos and experience a little of our country's history. I would end up experiencing a lot more than I had planned. I drove around taking in the sights of the many battlefields, and it was staggering how wide these fields stretched, and mind-boggling how many men had lost their lives in these grassy fields. This gave me a greater appreciation of the events that happened there. I wandered around snapping photos, and I lined up one near some large rocks strewn about, and I took a couple of photos when I felt a presence of someone standing near me. It must have been some sixth sense, but when I turned around, there was a man dressed in what looked like a tattered uniform, and he had a very ragged appearance to him, with his clothes torn and stained, a scruffy beard, and dark circles around his eyes. There was a sense of pain coming from his gaze. There was a sense coming from this figure that gave me pause, and I felt the hairs on my arm and the back of my neck go up. I couldn't explain it, but I knew there was something otherworldly about this man. He just looked at me, and then he said, "What you are looking for is over there." And he pointed with his gaunt hand at the area right behind me. Part of me didn't want to take my eyes off this figure because it gave me the willies, but he kept insisting and pointing. So I turned my gaze back to the field, and I didn't see anything of note. So I spun back around quickly, and the man was gone. It was a fairly open field, so there's no way it could have run away that quickly and disappeared from sight. This sent another wave of fear through my entire body, and for a moment I felt lightheaded and staggered a little bit, but eventually I was able to stabilize myself. Once I had my wits about me, I made it back to my car and went to the visitor center. I talked to one of the park rangers, and somehow they noticed that I was a little off. And then they asked me something they shouldn't, but they went ahead and did. They asked, "What did you see?" And I went on to recount my story about the tattered man. The park ranger explained that many men had lost their lives in that area, and others have talked about seeing this tattered figure. They said that he always pointed to the same spot in the field. Park ranger said he had gone back to that spot with one of the visitors where they'd seen the tattered man. He triangulated the spot a little bit and then walked to it. He made a note of the position. When he returned back to the visitor center, he studied the historical documents about the battles that had taken place there, and he learned that a number of men had died on that spot in one of the bloodiest battles of Gettysburg. The ranger was finished with his shift, and I asked him to take me back to that spot. I followed him to it. He walked me over, and he said, "This is the spot," and I kneeled down. I put up my hand and felt the ground, and it was as if a wave of relief passed through me. It was me acknowledging the spot that I believe gave the tattered man some comfort, that somebody remembered him. I can remember standing up, and I could feel the sting of tears in my eyes. And the park ranger gave me a look. He asked, "Are you okay?" And I just answered, "I think I will be." He went on his way. I stood there for a bit, and then I walked back to my car thinking about the tattered man and all the others who had lost their lives on the bloody battlefields of Gettysburg. To this day, I think back to that spot and that poor man, and I'm hoping I gave him some solace.